The gunshot that cracked through the spring air over Silver Creek, Colorado, wasn't the sound of a gunfight or a warning to outlaws. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It was a celebration, the church bells of the frontier kind, announcing that Eli Boone had just taken Evelyn Hart as his wife. The crowd outside the little white church cheered and clapped, hats raised high. Yet among all those smiling faces, only one pair of eyes shimmered with quiet sorrow. They belonged to Ruby Lane, the bride's younger sister, standing still with a small bunch of wildflowers trembling in her hands. At 20, Ruby was 2 years younger than Evelyn and had spent most of her life in her sister's long, dazzling shadow. Evelyn was the town's golden girl. Sun-bright hair, perfect figure, the kind of woman who could draw every eye without even trying. Ruby, on the other hand, was the quiet one with chestnut hair and a thoughtful face. Folks said she was plain, though anyone who looked closer might have noticed the gentleness in her eyes. What truly set the sisters apart wasn't their looks, but their spirits. Evelyn was charming and bold. Ruby was steady, kind, and serious, the kind of girl who read late into the night or balanced her father's ledgers at the general store. For months, Ruby had helped her sister plan this wedding, choosing ribbons, hemming lace, listening to Evelyn boast about the fine things she'd soon have as Mrs. Boone. Not once had Evelyn spoken of love. Smile. Ruby, her mother, Mary Beth. Dobbs hissed through tight lips, nudging her side as the new couple descended the church steps. People are watching. Ruby forced a smile, though it hurt her cheeks. She didn't envy her sister's groom. Eli Boone struck her as proud and self-important, but she pitied Evelyn for stepping into a marriage built on convenience rather than affection. The celebration soon moved to the Boone Ranch just beyond town, where long tables were set in the yard, draped with white ribbons and bright spring flowers. Fiddles played, boots stomped, and laughter rolled across the prairie. Ruby lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching her sister glide through the motions, laughing, prettily touching Eli's arm, as though love itself had been rehearsed. Not one for parties. The voice was deep, unexpected. Ruby turned, startled, to find a stranger beside her, a tall man with broad shoulders and dark hair that curled at the ends. His clean-shaven jaw set him apart from the rough cowhands of Silver Creek, and his eyes, bright as a mountain lake, caught hers. Ruby stumbled over her words. I suppose I'm just tired from all the wedding fuss. He nodded, glancing toward the dancing couple. She's a beautiful bride. Yes, Ruby said softly, unable to keep the wistfulness from her tone. She's your sister, he guessed, not asked. Ruby smiled faintly. Is it that obvious? There's a resemblance, he said, and his lips curved with a small dimple. Though yours is different. Plain, Ruby offered dryly, used to hearing it. He frowned. I was going to say genuine. Your smile doesn't look practiced. No one had ever told her that before. I'm Zeke Callahan, he said, extending his hand. Most folks just call me Zeke. I guide wagon trains through the mountains. Finished my last job yesterday. Ruby placed her hand in his, surprised at the gentleness in his grip despite the calluses. Ruby Lane, she replied. Miss Lane, he said with a respectful nod. Would you honor me with a dance? Ruby glanced toward the crowd spinning to the lively fiddle tune. I'm not much of a dancer, Mr. Callahan. Zeke, he corrected with an easy grin. And neither am I. Sounds like we're evenly matched, don't you think? Something in his manner, open, unhurried, made her heart steady instead of race. Before she could talk herself out of it, Ruby nodded. One dance. He led her to the edge of the clearing, placing a hand lightly at her waist. He moved a little stiffly. Clearly no practiced dancer, but there was an earnest warmth in every step that made Ruby forget herself. "So, Miss Lane," he asked, "what keeps you busy when you're not standing in for the bride?" "I help my father Hank Dobbs at the general store," Ruby said. "And I read whenever there's a quiet minute." "A reader, huh?" Zeke's brows lifted. "What kind of stories do you like adventure?" "Mostly," she said, smiling. "Far-off places, people brave enough to chase something more." Zeke chuckled. "I might have a few tales like that myself. Nothing from a book, just the kind that come from a saddle and a long trail." "I'd like to hear them sometime," Ruby replied, surprising herself with her boldness. When the song ended, Zeke reluctantly let go of her hand. "Tomorrow, maybe. There's a spot by the creek south of town, peaceful place for storytelling." Ruby hesitated. Meeting a man alone wasn't exactly proper. Yet something about Zeke Callahan's voice made her want to defy propriety just once. 2:00, she said finally. His grin widened. "I'll be there." For the rest of the evening, Ruby's eyes found him again and again, laughing with ranchers, talking easily with strangers. Every time he caught her gaze, he offered a small smile that made the world seem a little less ordinary. When the newlyweds departed in their carriage, Evelyn, glowing in satin, embraced her sister. "Be happy for me, little sister," she whispered. "I am Ruby," said, forcing a brave smile. "I wish you every happiness." "I wish you every happiness," Ruby said softly. As the carriage carrying Evelyn and Eli Boone rolled away from the churchyard, the cheers faded, leaving behind only the creak of wagon wheels and the scent of dust and lilacs in the spring air. Ruby sensed someone step up beside her. Turning slightly, she saw Zeke Callahan, his hat low against the afternoon sun, watching the departing couple with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Marriage," he murmured half to himself. "Some folks chase it for love, others for comfort, or what they think passes for it. Hard thing knowing which is which." Ruby glanced at him, wondering if he'd somehow caught her thoughts, the same doubts she'd wrestled with while watching her sister marry a man she barely cared for. "And you, Mr. Callahan?" she asked quietly. "Which would you choose?" He turned to face her, fully eyes the deep blue of twilight over the Rockies. "I've seen enough miles of this hard land to know life's too short for anything less than love. The kind that burns steady, not bright and gone." The raw honesty in his tone made Ruby's heart beat faster. Before she could answer, her mother's voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Ruby, help us with the tables." Dear Zeke tipped his hat. "Tomorrow then, Miss Lane. 2:00. Ruby nodded her chest, warm in a way she couldn't name. She watched as he walked away, tall and sure, his figure outlined against the sinking sun. For the first time that day, she found herself smiling for real. The next morning dawned bright, and still the kind of spring day when the air felt washed clean. Ruby woke early, humming softly, as she swept the front of Hank Dobbs's general store and stacked canned goods on the shelf. By noon, her father finally looked up from the ledger and pushed his spectacles up his nose. "You've been watching that clock like a cat watches a mouse," he said mildly. "Something on your mind, Ruby girl?" "No, Pa," she said too quickly, turning away. "Just thinking about Evelyn." Hank leaned back in his chair, studying her the way only a father could. "You met someone at that wedding, didn't you?" Ruby froze mid-motion. "What makes you think that?" He chuckled. "You've checked the clock 12 times in 1 hour, and you're wearing your good blue dress on a workday. Don't take a storekeeper to figure that one out." Ruby's cheeks flushed. "He's just passing through Pa. A trail guide named Zeke Callahan. We're meeting to talk, that's all." Callahan Hank mused, scratching his chin. "Heard that name before." Guide settlers across the mountains. Doesn't he folks say he's straight as a fence post? Honest man. Ruby exhaled softly, relief flickering through her chest. Her father's approval meant the world. Just mind your heart, girl, Hank added kindly. And be home before dark. At 1:45, Ruby set out from town carrying a small basket with bread, cheese, and 2 apples. The trail followed Silver Creek, winding past cottonwood trees and patches of wild violets. When she reached the clearing by the water, she was surprised to find Zeke already there, seated on a fallen log, with a small, leather-bound book in hand. He rose as soon as he saw her tucking the book into his vest pocket. "Miss Lane." He greeted his smile, easy and warm. "Thought for a minute you'd changed your mind." "I'm early," Ruby replied, returning the smile. "So am I," he admitted, laughing softly. "Guess I was looking forward to this." He took the basket from her and offered his arm, leading her to a spot where he'd spread a blanket near the edge of the creek. The gesture caught her off guard, gentle, deliberate, and unexpectedly thoughtful. "I hope this suits you," he said almost shyly. "After years on the trail, my sense of comfort might be a little rough around the edges." Ruby smiled. "It's perfect." The creek shimmered in the sun, framed by mountains that cut sharp against the sky. They sat together, the soft rush of water filling the pauses between them. "How long have you been guiding?" Ruby asked. "About 5 years," Zeke said, leaning back on one elbow. "Before that, cattle drives out of Texas. Trail guiding gives a man more freedom. Each trip's a new story, new faces, new hopes." As they shared the meal, he told her about those stories, raging rivers, fierce storms, and long nights under endless stars. He spoke of settlers who'd traded everything for a chance at a new life, and of the native tribes he'd met along the way, some friendly, some not. "What about your folks?" Ruby asked gently. "Do they live nearby?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. Lost my parents to cholera when I was 16. No brothers, no sisters. Been on my own since." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He shrugged, but the sadness lingered in his eyes. "Long time ago." "What about you, just Evelyn and me?" Ruby said. "Ma had a hard time after my sister was born. They called me a miracle child." "And now your sister's married," he said. "Guess your folks will be expecting you to follow." Ruby plucked at a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "My mother certainly hopes so. She's introduced me to just about every bachelor within 50 miles since I turned 18. None of them caught your fancy." "They weren't interested in me," she said plainly. "Once they met Evelyn, they forgot I was even in the room." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Then they're blind, or fools. Maybe both." Ruby blinked, startled by the edge in his voice. He met her gaze, steady and intense. "You don't have to flatter me, Mr. Callahan." "I know my place," she said softly. "I've never been the pretty one or the charming one. I'm practical, reliable." "Zeke," he corrected gently. "And maybe those are the things that matter most. Pretty fades. Charm can lie. But steady hearts and honest souls, those hold a family together when the wind blows hard." Ruby looked down her throat tight. No one had ever said words like that to her, not once. For the first time, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone finally saw her for who she truly was. "You're not like most men I've met," Ruby said at last. Her voice quiet, but steady. Zeke's mouth curved into a slow grin. "I'll take that as a compliment," he drawled. Then, with a flicker of sincerity softening his expression, he added, "Though for the record, I do think you're beautiful. Ruby Lane, just not in the shallow way this town tends to measure beauty." Her breath caught. Heat rose in her cheeks and she looked away. "You hardly know me," she murmured. "I'd like to change that," Zeke said simply. His tone held no arrogance, just truth. Their eyes met, and in that single heartbeat something shifted between them. It wasn't infatuation. It was something deeper, stronger, and far more dangerous. Before she could speak, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. Zeke looked up at the darkening clouds. "Looks like the weather's turning on us," he said. They began to gather their things, laughter and nervous energy blending with the scent of rain on the wind. By the time they reached the edge of town, the storm had broken wide open. Rain poured down in silver sheets, soaking them through as they dashed for cover. "This way," Zeke called, taking Ruby's hand and leading her toward the porch of the small hotel near the square. They stumbled beneath the awning, dripping and breathless rain thundering off the roof above them. Ruby laughed, an unguarded melodic sound that seemed to echo through the storm. So much for a peaceful afternoon by the creek. Zeke raked a wet hand through his hair, chuckling. "Guess the good Lord had different plans." "Still," he said, meeting her gaze, "I wouldn't trade this for anything." She suddenly realized he was still holding her hand. Every instinct told her to pull away. Silver Creek was a place where people noticed such things. But for once, Ruby didn't care. The connection felt too natural, too right. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "My folks will be wondering." Zeke released her hand slowly. "May I call on you tomorrow, properly at your home?" The idea made her pulse skip. She hesitated. Her mother would certainly have opinions, but she found herself nodding. "Yes, I'd like that." "Tomorrow then, Miss Lane," he said, tipping his hat. His voice dropped low and warm. 2:00. Ruby smiled as she turned toward home rain splashing around her boots. Somewhere deep inside, she knew her life had just turned a corner. True to his word, Zeke arrived the next evening at the Dobbs residence, dressed in his best, the shirt pressed vest buttoned, hair neatly combed. He carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Mary Beth Dobbs opened the door, curiosity written plain on her face. Word traveled fast in Silver Creek, and folks had noticed the stranger talking to Ruby at the wedding. "Mr. Callahan, I presume," she said, appraising him with the sharp eye of a woman who'd seen many kinds of men come and go. "Yes, ma'am," Zeke replied, removing his hat with old-fashioned courtesy. "Zeke Callahan. I came to call on Miss Ruby with your permission." His formal tone surprised her, clashing with his rugged, trail-worn appearance. After a pause, Mary Beth nodded. "Come in. My husband and daughter are in the parlor." Ruby sat upright on the edge of the sofa, hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd spent far too long preparing, pinning her hair up, just so, choosing a soft green dress that made her eyes seem brighter. Her father, Hank Dobbs, looked up from his armchair as Zeke entered. Zeke crossed the room with steady confidence, shaking Hank's hand firmly before turning to Ruby. "Miss Lane," he greeted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Callahan," Ruby replied, trying to sound composed, though her pulse was anything but calm. Zeke took the chair opposite Hank and rested his hat on his knee. "Mr. Dobbs." "Mrs. Dobbs," he began, "I'd like to be straight with you. I've come to ask permission to court your daughter properly. I think the world of her, and I'd like the chance to prove it." The room fell silent. Ruby's heart skipped. Had she heard him right? They'd only known each other a handful of days, but his words carried the weight of a man who meant everyone. Hank studied him, brow furrowed. "You're a trail guide, aren't you? Not the most settled trade for a man talking about courtship." "You're right, sir," Zeke admitted. "But I've been putting money aside to change that. I just placed a down payment on a piece of land 20 miles west good grazing country. I plan to raise and breed horses there. I've got experience from my cattle days in Texas." 20 miles is a long way, Mary Beth said coolly. "The railroad's pushing west. Zeke countered. A year or two from now, that won't seem so far. Land's cheap now, and it's a chance to build something of my own. Hank nodded slowly, respect flickering in his eyes. How long do you plan on staying in Silver Creek? I turned down my next guiding job, Zeke said, glancing toward Ruby. I'll be here through the summer, working that land, getting it ready. After that? Well, that depends on a few things. The meaning in his tone made Ruby's chest tighten. She looked down, a faint smile curving her lips. I see no harm in letting Mr. Callahan call on Ruby, Hank said finally, provided the visits are properly chaperoned. Mary Beth looked less convinced, but nodded stiffly. Ruby is of age. The choice is hers. Zeke's relief showed plainly. Thank you both, he said, reaching into his pocket for the package. Miss Lane, I brought you something. Ruby untied the string carefully. Inside was the small leather-bound book she'd seen him reading by the creek. Opening it, she found pages of handwritten notes and sketches, maps, River's stories of the trail. My travel journal, Zeke explained. You said you liked adventure tales. Figured you might enjoy reading a few that actually happened. Ruby ran her fingertips over the ink and paper, speechless. It was perhaps the most thoughtful gift she'd ever received. Simple, honest, deeply personal. Thank you, she whispered. I'll treasure it. Zeke's smile was quiet and full of meaning. That's all I hoped for. The glance that passed between Ruby and Zeke didn't go unnoticed by her parents. Clearing his throat, Hank Dobbs spoke in that steady tone that often carried more meaning than words. Maybe Ruby could show you our garden, Mr. Callahan, he said. From her chair, Mary Beth Dobbs added briskly, We'll take our tea on the porch, close enough to keep an eye on things. It was the most privacy they could expect, and Ruby was grateful for it. She led Zeke out the back door into the small family garden she tended with her mother. Spring had just begun to stir the earth, coaxing tulips and wild daisies to bloom between rows of vegetables. Your folks seem like good people, Zeke said, as they strolled between the beds. They are, Ruby replied softly, though I expect my mother might take some convincing. She dreamed of something grander for me than a horse ranch 20 miles from town. He studied her face. Is that how you see it too? Like you'd be settling for less than you deserve? Ruby stopped walking, the breeze catching a loose strand of her hair. I don't know what to think, Zeke. 2 days ago we were strangers. Now you're talking about land horses, and a future that somehow has my name written in it. It's a lot to take in. Too fast, he asked, concern flickering in his blue eyes. Yes, she admitted. Then with a nervous laugh, and somehow not fast enough. Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. It's strange, I feel like I've known you much longer than I have. Relief broke across his face in a boyish grin. I was hoping you'd say that. I've met more people than I can count out there on the trail, but you... He hesitated, his voice softening. You're like finding something I didn't even know I was looking for. From the porch, Mary Beth's voice cut through the still air. Stay where we can see you. Zeke chuckled under his breath, offering Ruby his arm. She took it, and they continued their slow walk along the garden rows. Tell me about your land, Ruby said. What made you choose that place? Zeke's whole expression brightened. He spoke of a small valley tucked between two low ridges, a year-round creek running through it, and open pasture fit for raising horses. He described how he planned to breed strong, smart stock animals that could handle rough country and long rides. I've already bought a few, he added. They're being kept at a ranch near Denver till my barn's ready. It sounds wonderful, Ruby said sincerely. A dream worth chasing. It is, Zeke replied. But lately I've realized dreams aren't worth much if you've got no one to share them with. The words hung between them unspoken and heavy with meaning. So instead of answering, Ruby asked about smaller things, the books they liked, the towns he'd passed through, what he missed most when he was on the trail. Their talk meandered easily, circling around the growing pull between them without naming it outright. When Zeke finally rose to leave, he thanked Hank and Mary Beth for their hospitality and asked if he might call again the next evening. Hank agreed with a nod, while Mary Beth hesitated before giving her measured approval. At the door, Zeke took Ruby's hand briefly. "Until tomorrow, Miss Lane." "Until tomorrow, Mr. Callahan," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she watched him stride down the dusty street toward the hotel, Ruby couldn't shake the certainty that something deep and irreversible had begun. In the weeks that followed, Zeke became a familiar figure at the Dobbs home. He'd visit Ruby most evenings, sometimes walking her through town under Mary Beth's watchful gaze, other times sitting in the parlor sharing coffee and stories. On Sundays, after Pastor Whitlow's sermons, he joined them for dinner. Hank found himself impressed by Zeke's intelligence and easy manner, while Mary Beth, despite her doubts, couldn't deny his respectfulness or the way he looked at Ruby like she was the only person in the room. During the day, Zeke was often away from town, riding out to his land west of Silver Creek. He worked long hours clearing brush, staking boundaries, and preparing to build. Each evening he returned coated in dust and sunshine, hands rougher, but spirit high. "I set the cornerstone for the cabin today," he told Ruby one evening as they sat together on the porch swing. Mary Beth was knitting just inside, pretending not to listen. "It's small but solid. A start. Something that'll grow with time. I'd like to see it someday," Ruby said, picturing the wide valley he'd described. "I was hoping you might," Zeke replied. "Your pa mentioned he's riding out to the McGraws next week to settle up on a delivery. My place isn't far from there. Maybe you could ride along and I could show you the land." Her face lit up. "I'll ask him. I'm sure he wouldn't mind the company." Hank agreed without hesitation. The following Tuesday, Ruby rode with her father in the wagon as they followed the rutted trail west. The trip took most of the morning, the sun warm on their backs, as the valley opened wide before them. "This country's changing fast," Hank said, as they crested a ridge. Below them stretched a patchwork of homesteads, smoke rising from chimneys, cattle grazing in distant fields. "When your ma and I came here 15 years back, there wasn't a soul for 100 miles. Just wilderness. Now we've got farms, a church, a school. That's progress for you. Do you ever regret it?" Ruby asked softly. Leaving the east for all this, Hank smiled, faintly eyes on the land. "Times were hard, sure. Your ma missed home something fierce. But no, I don't regret it. There's pride in carving a life from nothing and seeing your work grow and take root. That's a kind of reward money can't buy." By midday, they reached the McGraw Ranch, where Hank handled his business, then continued toward the meeting spot, a lonely stretch marked by a tall cottonwood tree. Zeke was already there astride his bay gelding, the wind tugging at his hat brim. When he saw Ruby, his face broke into a grin. He dismounted quickly, boots crunching the dry earth as he helped her down from the wagon. "Mr. Dobbs, Miss Lane," he greeted warmly. "I'm mighty glad you came. We'll need to head back by 4, Hank said, checking his pocket watch. "That'll give us daylight to spare." Zeke nodded. "Then let's make the most of it. That gives you about 3 hours to show Ruby your land," Hank Dobbs said, checking the sky before glancing toward the distant ridge. "That'll be plenty," Zeke Callahan assured him. "My horse can carry us both, it's not far." With Hank's nod, Zeke swung easily into the saddle, then reached down to help Ruby Lane up behind him. Her hands settled hesitantly around his waist, and she felt the steady warmth of him through his shirt, the rise and fall of his breathing in rhythm with the horse's gait. "Hold on tight," Zeke called over his shoulder as they left the main trail, guiding the gelding down a narrow path that wound between jagged rocks and tall stands of pine. When the trees finally opened, the valley unfolded before them like something out of a dream. Ruby gasped. It was more beautiful than she'd imagined. A wide stretch of green nestled between soft hills, a clear stream weaving through the grass like a thread of silver. Wild flowers painted the meadow in purples and yellows, and a small herd of deer bounded into the distance. "Oh, Zeke," Ruby breathed. "It's breathtaking." He brought the horse to a stop on a small rise overlooking the land. "This is where the house will stand," he said, pointing toward a foundation of rough-hewn stone already set into the earth. "The barn will be to the east, and the corral down that way where the ground's flat." He helped her down, and together they walked through the tall grass toward his small camp, just a canvas tent, a fire pit, and a few tools. "I've been staying out here 3-4 nights a week," he said, "trying to get as much done as I can before winter sets in." "All by yourself?" Ruby asked, worry creeping into her voice. "For now," he said with a nod. "Once I get the main buildings framed, I'll hire help. But the foundation that I wanted to lay with my own hands." There was something in his tone that stopped her cold, a quiet pride, the kind that comes from shaping your future from nothing but will and hard work. Ruby could see it now, not just a homestead, but a life he was building one stone at a time. They sat beside the stream to eat the lunch Mary Beth Dobbs had packed. The water murmured softly nearby while they shared bread, cheese, and fruit in companionable silence. "What's on your mind?" Zeke asked at last, watching her carefully. Ruby hesitated. "Just how different all this is from what I pictured. I always thought I'd marry someone from Silver Creek, live above the store, keep books for Pa. Safe, predictable." She smiled faintly. "And now here I am, miles from anywhere, with a man I barely knew a month ago, talking about horses and valleys and possibilities." Zeke reached across the space between them, his calloused fingers brushing hers. "I know this feels sudden, Ruby. Maybe it is. But sometimes the right things don't wait on time or logic. They just happen." She looked down at their joined hands. "My sister knew her husband for years before they married," she said. "They grew up together, everyone expected it. And are they happy?" Zeke asked quietly. Ruby thought of Evelyn Hart's letters from Denver, filled with talk of social gatherings and fine dresses, yet somehow hollow. "I think they're content," she said at last. "Is that enough for you?" "Just contentment." Ruby lifted her gaze to his. "No," she said simply. "It's not." His expression softened, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with something unspoken. "It's not enough for me, either," he murmured. "Ruby, Before he could finish, a distant rumble of thunder cut across the valley. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, echoing the storm that had brought them together weeks ago. "We'd better head back," Zeke said reluctantly. "Your pa'll be waiting, and that sky looks mean." They packed up quickly and rode toward the crossroads, the wind whipping through Ruby's hair, the scent of rain in the air. By the time they reached Hank and the wagon, the storm had drawn close enough that thunder rolled over the hills like cannon fire. Right on time, Hank called, waving them over. "We best move if we want to outrun it." Zeke swung down and helped Ruby dismount. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "Seeing you out here, it made it all feel real. Like it's meant to be." Ruby met his eyes, her heart tugging. "It felt right to me, too," she said, giving his hand a quick squeeze before climbing into the wagon. "Will you be in town tomorrow?" Hank asked, as Zeke mounted his horse. "Yes, sir. Need to pick up supplies. Then join us for supper, 6 o'clock. Zeke tipped his hat. "I'd be honored." As the wagon rolled away, Ruby looked back. Zeke sat tall in the saddle, the wind tugging at his coat, lightning flashing behind him. Against the storm, he looked every inch the man he was, steady, unyielding, carved from the same earth he was building his home upon. "He's a good man," Hank said, following her gaze. "Hard-working. Knows where he's going." "Yes," Ruby said softly. "He does." They reached Silver Creek just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Marybeth met them at the door, ushering them inside. "Thank heaven you're back," she said. "That storm looks fierce." All through the evening, as thunder cracked over the valley and rain battered the windows, Ruby's thoughts drifted westward to the lonely camp by the stream to Zeke, out there beneath that same restless sky. She barely slept, waking with every clap of thunder, her heart tight with worry. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and glistening beneath a bright blue sky. Ruby moved through her chores distractedly, her mind still on Zeke and the things they'd said by the water. At the general store, she found herself miscounting change twice and nearly forgot Agnes Crow's flower order altogether. Hank Dobbs noticed his daughter's distracted expression, but said nothing, quietly correcting her mistakes as she worked. By mid-afternoon, Ruby Lane was arranging a new shipment of fabric when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, and there was Zeke Callahan standing in the doorway, the scent of rain and road dust still clinging to him. His clothes bore traces of his long ride, but his hair was neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. Mr. Callahan Hank greeted from behind the counter, his tone friendly. "Glad to see you made it through that storm in one piece." "It was a rough night," Zeke admitted with a grin, but the tent held barely. His eyes found Ruby's across the store, and the warmth in them made her pulse stumble. She quickly bent her head, pretending to study a bolt of calico, suddenly aware of her plain work apron and the loose strands of hair that had escaped her pins. Zeke stepped up to the counter and spoke to Hank in a low, measured tone Ruby couldn't quite hear. Her father nodded several times, his face serious but not displeased. After a moment, Zeke tipped his hat to them both and stepped back into the sunlight. "What was that about, Pa?" Ruby asked, trying to sound casual. Hank smiled faintly. "Just a little business between Mr. Callahan and me. Nothing you need to fret over." The rest of the afternoon crawled by. When Ruby was finally free to go home and prepare for supper, she hurried upstairs, changing into her best everyday dress. A blue cotton trimmed in white, one Evelyn had once said, made her look almost pretty. Marybeth Dobbs appeared in the doorway, arms folded, watching her daughter pin her hair into soft curls instead of her usual sensible bun. "You've grown quite fond of that Mr. Callahan," she observed. Ruby met her mother's gaze in the mirror. "Yes, I have," she admitted simply. Marybeth sighed, perching on the edge of the bed. "It's all happening so fast, Ruby. Are you sure about him? About this life he's offering you? I know it seems sudden, but when I'm with Zeke, everything feels right. Like something inside me finally fits. And his land," Marybeth pressed gently. "That faraway valley. The hard work, the isolation, you've never known that kind of life." "Are you truly ready for it?" Ruby turned toward her mother. "I think I am." "The land is beautiful, Ma. And Zeke, he has a vision for it. I believe in him." Marybeth studied her for a long moment, her expression softening. "You've always been the sensible one, Ruby. The one I never had to worry about. I suppose I should trust your judgment now, even if it takes you far from us." "Nothing's decided yet," Ruby said quickly, though her heart raced at the unspoken truth in her mother's words. Marybeth gave a small, sad smile. "Hasn't it?" Then she stood smoothing her skirt. "Come on now, we've a dinner to prepare. Your father and Mr. Callahan will be here soon." Zeke arrived right on time, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers, like those that grew on his land. He offered them to Marybeth with a polite bow that actually drew a genuine smile from her lips. Through supper, Zeke was at his best charming without arrogance, warm without pretense. He told stories from the trail that even made Mary Beth laugh, and he listened intently as Hank spoke about the town's growth and the challenges of running the general store. After the meal, Mary Beth suggested lightly, "Ruby, why don't you show Mr. Callahan the new roses I planted out back?" Hank simply nodded, the faintest twinkle of approval in his eye. Out in the gathering dusk, the roses glowed pale against the deepening shadows. Zeke paused to admire them, but Ruby sensed his thoughts were elsewhere. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she said softly. Zeke turned to her eyes, serious in the fading light. "I spoke to your father today. About us." Her breath caught. "And what did he say?" "He said I should speak to you directly." Zeke stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "Ruby Lane, I know we've not known each other long, but I've never been surer of anything in my life. I love you. I want you beside me on that land in that home in every tomorrow I've got. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Ruby couldn't breathe. She had sensed this was coming, but standing there, seeing the honesty and hope in his face, it struck deep. "I know it soon." Zeke went on, mistaking her silence. "If you need time." "Yes," she whispered, finding her voice. "Yes, Zeke, I'll marry you." The joy that broke across his face was like sunrise over the valley. He drew her into his arms, holding her, as though the whole world rested in that moment. "I'll make you happy, Ruby," he murmured into her hair. "I'll build a life that'll be worthy of you." When they returned inside, hand in hand, cheeks flushed with quiet joy, no words were needed. Hank and Mary Beth were waiting in the parlor, and one look told them everything. "I take it she said yes?" Hank said, rising to clasp Zeke's hand. "She did, sir," Zeke answered, still smiling like a man who'd just won the world. Mary Beth dabbed at her eyes. "Well, I suppose we've got a wedding to plan." Zeke and Ruby exchanged a look. "I'd like to have the house framed and the barn standing first," Zeke said thoughtfully. "Late summer, maybe," Ruby offered. "When the wildflowers bloom again." August, Zeke agreed, his voice soft with wonder. "August it is." The next morning, Zeke rode out to his land, promising to return each weekend until the wedding. Ruby threw herself into preparations, ordering fabric for her gown, helping her mother plan the small ceremony, and collecting the household things she would need for her new home. Word spread quickly through Silver Creek. Some folks were surprised that quiet Ruby Lane had caught herself a husband before many of the town's prettier, more social girls. But those who knew her best, like Lila May, the shopkeeper's daughter, and Ruby's oldest friend, were thrilled. "I always said a man'd come along who could see what the rest of them were too blind to notice," Lila told her, helping stitch the hem of Ruby's wedding dress. Ruby smiled softly, thinking of Zeke, of his steady hands, his earnest eyes, and the way he'd looked at her that night in the garden, as though she were the rarest thing he'd ever found on this earth. "I never thought it would happen this fast, Ruby," Lane admitted one afternoon as she and Lila May worked side by side on the final stitches of her wedding gown. "It feels like my whole world turned upside down in just a few weeks." Lila chuckled, threading her needle with a grin. "When it's right, it's right. My folks met and got engaged in less than a fortnight. Been married 25 years and still fussing at each other like newlyweds." The weeks that followed were a blur of motion and joy. Zeke Callahan's visits became the bright points of Ruby's days, each one revealing more of the man she'd chosen. He'd bring her small tokens from his land, a river stone polished smooth by time, a hawk's feather, or hand-drawn sketches of their future home taking shape piece by piece. By late July, a letter arrived from Evelyn Hart replying to the news of Ruby's engagement. The words were polite but distant, the tone formal, almost cool. Reading between the lines, Ruby sensed something unspoken. Perhaps not jealousy of Zeke himself, but of the warmth and affection that Evelyn's own marriage to Eli Boone seemed to lack. As August drew near, Zeke's trips into Silver Creek grew more frequent. The house was nearly done, and he proudly brought photographs taken by a traveling photographer he'd hired to record the progress. "The roof's on," he said one warm evening on the Dobbs' porch, showing her the images. "Windows, too. Just finishing up the floors and walls now. It's plain but solid, something to build a life on." Ruby traced a finger over the photo, her chest tightening. "It looks perfect." "When can I see it again? I was thinking." "Next week," Zeke replied. "Your pa says he can spare you from the store. We'll take Lila May along as a chaperone. Maybe stay the night with the McGraws so you can see the place in daylight." Her heart fluttered with both excitement and unease. The thought of leaving home, of stepping into a new life, was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. The following week, the journey to Zeke's land felt lighter than before. The sky was a clear western blue, and Lila's chatter kept the miles from feeling long. Zeke rode beside their wagon, pointing out creeks and hills telling stories of the frontier's early settlers. When they crested the final ridge, Ruby caught her breath. The transformation was astonishing. Where once there had been a bare stone foundation and a canvas tent, now stood a real home. A sturdy log cabin with a broad porch overlooking the stream, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. Nearby, the barn's frame rose proudly against the horizon, half-finished, but already full of promise. "Oh, Zeke," Ruby's voice caught. "It's beautiful." Even Lila let out a low whistle. "You've been busy, Mr. Callahan." Zeke grinned, pride lighting his face. "Hired a couple hands from town to help these past weeks, but most of it I wanted to do myself." He helped them down and led them through the house. Inside the cabin was modest but welcoming. The main room doubled as kitchen and parlor, with a wide stone hearth at one end. 2 doors led off the space, one to what would be their bedroom, and another smaller one Zeke described with a shy smile as for guests now, children later. Ruby flushed while Lila tried and failed to hide her grin. The furniture was handmade and sturdy. A rough-hewn table and chairs, a rocking chair by the largest window, and shelves built from pine boards. In the kitchen stood a small cast-iron stove, polished clean beside a water pump, Zeke proudly demonstrated. "No more hauling buckets from the creek," he said with a wink. "And I've ordered real glass for the windows. It should arrive before the wedding." Ruby moved through the space in quiet awe. It wasn't grand, but it was crafted with care, with heart. Every nail, every beam spoke of Zeke's hands and his hope for their future. "What do you think?" he asked softly, watching her. "It's not much I know." "It's perfect," Ruby said, cutting him off with conviction. "Absolutely perfect." Relief washed over his face. "There's more. I want to show you the spring house, the garden where I plan to plant apple trees come next year." They spent the afternoon walking the property, sunlight spilling over the hills, as Zeke shared his plans. By the time they rode to the McGraw ranch for the night, Ruby could already see it all in her mind, a life of hard work, yes, but filled with laughter, love, and the sweet smell of mountain air. The last weeks before the wedding were a blur of needlework planning and anticipation. Ruby's gown was finished, a modest ivory silk trimmed with lace. Mary Beth Dobbs, now fully supportive after visiting the homestead herself, helped her daughter pack linens and keepsakes for her new life. Hank Dobbs spent his evenings with Zeke, discussing ranch management and crop cycles as though he were already part of the family. Though he never said it aloud, Ruby saw it in her father's eyes. Zeke had earned his respect, maybe even his affection. The day before the wedding, Evelyn Hart arrived from Denver with Eli Boone in tow. Their reunion was polite, but edged with something unspoken. Evelyn looked her sister over her perfect brows, lifting slightly. "You look different," she said, glancing around the room full of packed trunks and folded linens. "More certain of yourself." Ruby smiled softly. "I feel different. Happy." Evelyn's expression faltered for a heartbeat, revealing something wistful. "I never would have guessed you'd be the one to marry for love." "Didn't you?" Ruby asked gently. Evelyn looked away, her voice tight. "Eli's a good husband. He provides, and our home in Denver is comfortable. Many women would envy me." Ruby reached out, touching her sister's hand. "Comfort isn't the same as happiness, Evelyn." Evelyn didn't reply. She only stared at the window, where the evening light slanted across the packed trunks that would soon carry her sister away to a different kind of life. A freer one. "But you love him," Ruby Lane said gently, studying her sister's face. "I'm fond of him, Evelyn." Hart replied after a pause. "That's enough, isn't it? We fit well together. We want the same things in life." Ruby thought of Zeke Callahan, of the way her pulse quickened whenever he walked into a room of their quiet talks about the future, of the warmth in his eyes that made her feel truly seen. "I hope it's enough for you," she murmured. "I really do." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and cloudless, the kind of perfect day the Colorado frontier rarely offered. It felt as if the land itself was blessing their union. The ceremony took place in the same small church where Evelyn had once married Eli Boone, but that was where the similarities ended. Evelyn's wedding had been a grand affair: imported roses, silver-trimmed ribbons, and Denver guests dressed like royalty. Ruby's was simple, intimate, and far more sincere. Wildflowers from Zeke's Valley lined the pews, their scent mingling with pine and sunshine streaming through the church windows. Inside the modest anteroom, Hank Dobbs stood beside his daughter, trying to hide his emotion as she adjusted her veil. "You look beautiful, daughter," he said thickly. "Thank you, Pa." Ruby whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure you're ready to give me away?" Hank chuckled softly, his voice breaking. "A father's never ready to give his little girl away, not if it's to the next town or across the prairie. But knowing you're marrying a man who truly loves you, that makes it easier." The first notes of the organ drifted through the air, Lila Mae's younger sister at the keys, and the church doors opened wide. Ruby took a steadying breath and stepped into the aisle, her arm looped through her father's. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, friends, and townsfolk who had watched her grow from a shy girl behind the counter of her father's store into a young woman radiant with love. But Ruby saw only one face. Zeke waited at the altar in a crisp black suit, his expression a mix of awe and tenderness as he watched her draw near. The rest blurred into a dream. Pastor Whitlow's voice. The exchanged vows, the soft slide of the gold ring onto her finger. What she remembered most was the steadiness of Zeke's hands and the quiet certainty in his eyes when he promised her forever. The celebration that followed spilled out into Silver Creek's town square. Long tables sat beneath the cottonwoods, strung with paper lanterns and bright bunting. Fiddles played, laughter rang out, and neighbors toasted the new couple with cider and whiskey alike. Ruby danced until her feet ached, smiling through every turn. Yet her gaze kept finding Zeke across the square, his grin, his blue eyes, the unspoken pull between them. When twilight fell, Zeke caught her hand and drew her aside, leading her up the church steps, where the noise faded to a distant hum. "Mrs. Callahan," he said softly, savoring the sound of it. Are you happy? Ruby reached up, brushing her fingers against his cheek. Happier than I ever dreamed possible. He smiled that warm, unguarded smile that had undone her from the start. I was thinking about the day we met your sister's wedding. I didn't know walking into that church would change my life. I remember seeing you too, Ruby confessed, wondering who you were, never imagining you'd notice me, not with Evelyn there. Zeke's eyes darkened with sincerity. I noticed her for about 2 seconds. She was beautiful, sure, but too aware of it. Then I saw you standing off to the side, quiet but strong. You weren't performing for anyone. That's what caught me, Ruby. You were real. She smiled, a tear slipping free. So you sought me out on purpose? He laughed quietly. Couldn't help myself. By the time that first dance ended, I was already halfway in love with you. Ruby's heart swelled. To be chosen not for polish or beauty, but for who she truly was, felt like a blessing she'd never dared to hope for. We should go back before they come looking, she whispered, but her hand lingered in his. Tomorrow, Zeke said, eyes shining. Tomorrow at this time we'll be home, our home. The word home settled between them like sunlight, warm, full of promise. The next morning, their journey westward felt like a joyful procession. Wagons rolled together down the dusty trail, Hank and Marybeth Dobbs in one hauling Ruby's trunks and linens, Lila May and her father in another, carrying wedding gifts and supplies. Zeke and Ruby led the way in their own wagon, pulled by 2 strong bays, bred by his own hand. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Ruby gasped. Zeke had prepared a surprise. The cabin and barn were trimmed with ribbons and wildflowers, a handmade sign hanging above the porch that read, "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan." In the corral, where once there'd been nothing but dust, grazed a sleek chestnut mare. "Oh, Zeke," Ruby whispered, tears filling her eyes. "What have you done?" He smiled, shy and proud all at once. "I wanted our homecoming to be special. The mare's for you, your wedding gift. She's gentle, but she's got spirit." Ruby's throat tightened. "She's perfect. Everything is perfect." "Then say it," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "Say you're happy. Say you don't regret this life with me." She turned toward him, the world narrowing to just the 2 of them. "I will never regret choosing you, Zeke Callahan, not for a single day." That evening, their new home brimmed with warmth and laughter. The Dobbses, the Mize, and a few close friends shared a meal cooked by Ruby and her mother in the brand-new kitchen. Later, as dusk deepened into night, they all sat on the porch watching the sunset wash the valley in violet and gold. Hank and Zeke talked livestock and fences, Marybeth knitted by the lamplight, and Lila strummed softly on her guitar. Ruby leaned against her husband's shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke, her heart full to bursting. This quiet, golden moment was everything she had ever wanted. This was home. The journey that had begun the day Evelyn Hart said her vows had led Ruby Lane to a happiness she'd never dared to dream possible. That night, after their guests had gone, and the house had gone still, Zeke Callahan reached for Ruby's hand and led her quietly into the room that was now theirs. A single oil lamp glowed on the bedside table, its golden light washing over the simple but cozy space, a sturdy bed covered by the patchwork quilt Marybeth Dobbs had stitched for them, a pine dresser Zeke had built with his own hands, and a small shelf already filled with Ruby's treasured books. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said softly, drawing her close. Ruby looked up at him. This man who had seen her when others never looked twice, who had chosen her heart and soul and built a life from the raw bones of the frontier just for them. "I love you, Zeke." She whispered the words, trembling, but sure as natural as breathing. His first kiss was tender, almost reverent, then deepened warmth, spreading through her, until the world beyond their walls ceased to exist. When they came together as husband and wife, Ruby understood fully and forever what true love meant. Not the kind of polite affection her sister endured in Denver, but the fierce, unshakable kind, born of shared hope, sweat and faith, a love that bound two souls as one. In the years that followed, the Callahan Ranch thrived. Zeke's horse breeding business grew into one of the most respected in the territory, drawing buyers from as far as California and Kansas. Their home expanded too, room by room, as their family did, first with the birth of Luke Callahan in 1876, then Nora Callahan in 1878, and finally Wyatt Callahan in 1880. Ruby found herself fulfilled in ways she'd never expected. Her steady mind and knack for figures balanced Zeke's drive and ambition perfectly. Together they faced every hardship the frontier could throw their way. Long winters, fierce droughts, sleepless nights tending to sick children or foaling mares, and somehow came through stronger each time. Hank and Mary Beth Dobbs visited often, especially after Hank sold the general store and retired. He'd help Zeke mend fences or repair wagons, while Mary Beth doted on the grandchildren, filling the cabin with laughter and the smell of fresh-baked pie. Evelyn's visits were rarer but gentler with the passing years. Though her life in Denver was polished and prosperous, it was also lonely. She brought her nieces and nephews gifts from the city, fine ribbons, toy horses, and storybooks bound in gold, and watched with quiet envy as Ruby's children tumbled through the dirt, happy and free. By 1885, the railroad had finally reached within 5 miles of their land, just as Zeke had once predicted. The trip to Silver Creek was easier now, though Ruby rarely stayed long. On one visit that summer, Ruby walked down the busy main street of her old hometown, her 2 eldest, Luke and Nora, skipping at her side. Silver Creek had changed new storefronts, a larger church, and the hum of trains in the distance. Near the bank, she came face to face with Eli Boone, now a successful banker in a tailored suit that looked more at home in Denver than on the frontier. "Evelyn's in the city," he explained politely, "overseeing the renovations on our home. You look well, Mrs. Callahan. Country life seems to suit you." "It does," Ruby said, smiling. "Very much so." He nodded stiffly. "Your husband, Zeke Callahan, breeds horses, I hear. Quite the enterprise." "Yes," Ruby replied, a quiet pride warming her voice. "He has a gift for it. And for many things." Eli hesitated, his eyes unreadable. "Give him my regards." Then, with a polite tip of his hat, he walked away back into a world of figures and formality that Ruby had long left behind. For a moment she felt a pang of pity for him, and for Evelyn too. They had everything society admired: wealth, respectability, security. Yet they lacked what truly mattered. That evening, Ruby sat on Lila May's porch, watching her children play tag with Lila's own. Fireflies blinked in the fading light. "You ever miss it?" Lila asked, nodding toward the town beyond. Living here close to everything, Ruby considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the convenience," she admitted. "The sound of people astore just down the road. But no, not really. The valley feels more like home than this place ever did." Lila smiled knowingly. "And Zeke," Ruby's lips curved softly. "Always Zeke." The next morning, the train carried them back toward the open country, past the flat farmlands, through the cottonwoods, and finally into the wild ridges of their valley. Luke and Nora chattered excitedly about seeing their father again, while little Wyatt, just 5, had stayed behind with Zeke to help with the horses. When they stepped off the small station platform, the wagon was already waiting. Wyatt spotted them first and came running, his small boots kicking up dust. Behind him, Zeke climbed down from the seat, smiling wide. Ruby knelt to scoop her son into her arms, then stood to meet her husband's gaze. Even after 10 years, that look, steady, loving, fierce, still sent her heartbeat racing. "Welcome home," Zeke murmured, wrapping her close. "Feels good to be back," she whispered against his chest. Over his shoulder, she saw it, all the sprawling ranch, the orchard beginning to bear fruit, the corral alive with sleek horses, and the mountains beyond catching the last of the sun. This valley was their heart, their story written in the land itself. And as the wagon rolled toward home, Ruby knew with the same fierce certainty she'd felt the day he first chose her over her sister, that she had been chosen not by chance, but by destiny. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.